Well, every day in Canada, there's an update on COVID-19 cases and its effect on our economy, the latest health research, and the latest government assistance. It can be overwhelming. Joining me to discuss the government side of things is Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachael Harder. Welcome, Rachael.
Thank you. It's so good to be here with you.
Yes. Okay, so let's get right to it. So there was a debate this past while over how often Parliament should meet in person and also virtually. Can you comment on this? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. So, of course, as parliamentarians, we're used to meeting in the House of Commons with 338 of us in order to discuss the things that matter most to Canadians. And we made an agreement in mid-March that we would break until April 20th, and in order to give attention to our ridings and really focus on the pandemic and responding locally. That said, April 20th came, and we had to make a decision as to whether or not the House would resume. And as Conservatives, we really felt that it was important actually for the House to go back into session in a reduced capacity, so there would be fewer MPs in the House, so that we could respect social distancing and make sure that we did it with the greatest degree of safety as possible. And but we felt that it was really important to be there, to be able to ask the government important questions, to be able to stand up for Canadians, to advocate for what is in the public's best interest. Unfortunately, other parties did not agree with us. And so at the end of the day, what was settled upon was that we would do 2 virtual sittings per week and 1 in-house sitting per week. Now, that said, interestingly enough, the House of Commons has come back and said, actually, it's going to be about a month till about mid-May before they're actually ready to do those virtual sittings, which is unfortunate for the Canadian public.
Wow. Okay, so during one of these debates last month, the Liberals proposed a bill to spend $82 billion in COVID-19 aid, which also would have given them the unchecked power to raise taxes, debt, and spending without parliamentary approval until 2022. So, what is your take on this?
Yeah, so in this process, during the time that the House wasn't sitting, the Liberals put forward a piece of legislation that would allow them to spend money, put benefits forward for Canadians who are suffering because of COVID. So fair enough. However, what was unfair was the fact that they tried to sneak into this bill um, unilateral power to tax and spend, and they would have had the ability to do so until basically 2022. Now, Conservatives did due diligence and looked over the bill, and we found this and called them out on it. And so, of course, they were not appreciative of that. But we believe that it's in the best interest of Canadians to hold the government to account and to make sure that any spending that takes place does, in fact, have to go through Parliament. That is what it is to be a part of a democracy, is that the government doesn't get unilateral power. They don't get to act as a dictatorship. And so at the end of the day, they did back off. And that said, they do have significant spending power until the end of June. And then that will be reassessed based on where we're at with this pandemic going forward.
Right. Let's move on to the WHO. Should Canada be reducing its dependence on the World Health Organization when it comes to making health decisions? The WHO was slow to declare COVID-19 as a global pandemic, and as a result, Canada was slow to close our borders to international travel. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, an excellent question, and certainly the one that many Canadians are pondering right now. The World Health Organization provided us with some really inaccurate information early on. So originally they told us that COVID-19 couldn't be transmitted from person to person. Well, we found out that that was false. They also said that masks wouldn't do anything to help the spread. Well, now people are very much encouraged to wear a mask. So there's been a flip-flop on information, which I think certainly produces an element of distrust within the Canadian public, and I would even say around the globe, in terms of the World Health Organization and the information that we're getting from them. At the end of the day, Canadians really need to have a voice on this, and they really need to be heard. So I would encourage them actually to reach out to the minister, the public safety minister, and to have their voices heard. And I think at the end of the day, we really need to hear back from them and then make a decision going forward. But the World Health Organization needs to be held accountable for the decisions that were made.
Right. Now, speaking of health, does Canada need to take serious steps to being self-sufficient for pharmaceuticals, medical and personal protective equipment supplies? What do you think?
Yeah, so, normally Canada would have quite the stockpile put away for an emergency situation like this. Unfortunately, what ended up happening was actually a lot of our warehouses were cleared out in 2019, and to our knowledge, they weren't restocked. So then, when a pandemic hits, as it has, we're in trouble. And not only that, but also, as you know, the federal government made the decision to send a ton of our PPE over to China earlier this year. So at the end of the day, the well-being of another country was put before our own. Look, I believe that it is the basic and most fundamental responsibility of the federal government to put the safety and security of Canadians first. And unfortunately, Justin Trudeau did not do that.
This pandemic has also really hit the agriculture sector hard. We're hearing of raw milk being dumped and the closure of meat processing plants. Some farmers are saying if they don't have some government backup guarantees, they're not going to risk planting a crop this year. So, Rachel, what are you hearing from Lethbridge area producers, and what does the federal government need to do to help the ag sector?
It's an excellent question, and I really appreciate that you're asking about our agricultural producers. They are absolutely vital to our well-being. We're talking about the men and women who work incredibly hard to make sure that we have food on our tables. I've had the opportunity to talk with many of the producers in the Lethbridge area, and what I'm hearing back from them is they need the federal government to step up and provide provide financial backing for them to be able to move forward with confidence. Without that confidence, we could be risking our food security. So farmers may make the decision not to put crops in the field. And certainly those who have cattle or who have pork or chicken, they're also facing plant shutdowns. And so that means that they're stuck with live animals and having to incur the cost of feeding them, but they don't actually have a market. At the same time, for Canadians, it means that we don't have food on our tables. That's a really unfortunate place to be. And as I said, farmers need the government to come forward and to really help them out in this time.
Yeah, it's a tough time for everybody, including the energy sector right now. So Alberta is getting hammered as oil prices dropped into negative territory for the first time ever. The Liberals did offer a financial aid package with $1.7 billion towards cleaning up abandoned oil and gas wells, and then another $750 million to cut methane emissions, plus expanded credit lines for smaller oil companies. And is that going to be enough, do you think?
Another very important question. The energy sector is super important to the Canadian economy. We know that it is the leading export from our nation, and we know that it is the #1 private sector investor. Oil and gas is largely the reason why we're able to move forward with new schools and new hospitals and roads and bridges and other recreational infrastructure that we all enjoy. And so when that industry suffers, we all suffer. Not to mention, look, there are still cars on the road. There are still homes that need to be heated. There are businesses that need to be heated. We still have to function in our daily lives, which means that we rely on oil and gas. Well, Canada produces the most ethical and environmentally friendly oil and gas products. And so at the end of the day, this industry needs the support of the federal government. And unfortunately, Justin Trudeau and his cabinet are just not coming to the table with anything sufficient. As a result, Canada is hurting and will continue to hurt for quite some time. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that the Prime Minister is more interested in supporting a regime like Saudi Arabia, where they have no human rights records and fail to take care of the environment. Meanwhile, he's able to I think even excited perhaps to let Canada suffer. That's not okay. That's not leadership. That's not a prime minister who believes in the well-being of his country and its future. Look, at the end of the day, there were some really solid steps that could have been taken. #1, scrap Bill C-69. #2, scrap Bill C-48. #3, remove the vast majority of regulatory burdens. Many of them don't need to be there. Get projects approved and let's get going.
Yeah, well, there's no question about it that individuals and businesses are needing government help right now. But this can't continue forever, obviously. At some point, the economy does need to reopen, and the debt is going to be enormous, like you said. A number of provinces are considering lifting some restrictions and reopening their economies as early as May. Do you think that this is a good idea?
I think Canada is a really unique country in the sense that we're set up as a confederation, which means provinces have a lot of sovereignty within themselves. So I trust the premiers of the provinces to make the decision that is best for them. Ultimately, Justin Trudeau is going to lead the country in a direction that he sees best at that national level. But it really is up to each province to determine what is happening within its borders. So for example, a province like Saskatchewan that only has 1.2 million people within it is probably going to be able to bounce back quite a bit quicker than, let's say, a province like Ontario. And so, again, I would say, we probably need to take a step back and allow premiers to make the decision that is best. And of course, that decision needs to be responsible. Of course, that decision needs to make sure that we're looking out for the safety and the well-being of Canadian citizens. And definitely the most vulnerable, including seniors and those who are compromised within their health, they need to be looked after. And so decisions do need to be made that take that into account.
What steps would you like to see the government take towards an exit plan to set a realistic path towards economic recovery?
Yeah, it's again an excellent question, and these are the questions that we should be answering. The Prime Minister gets out there every single day in front of his little cottage, and he answers questions, or sort of. And when he offers his reflections, one of the things that he's been really clear on is he said, we're not even going to talk about it. We're not even going to talk about it. Well, that's wrong. That is a lack of leadership for this country, and Canadians deserve better. Why aren't we talking about it? Because if we bring ideas to the table, if we engage in productive dialogue, if we have an informed conversation, we can move forward in a responsible manner and protect the most vulnerable within Canada while simultaneously getting our markets back up and running and allowing people to earn a living once again. It is just basic human dignity that we would have the conversation and put a strategic plan in place and start moving forward slowly towards opening up our economy again.
Okay, so a number of countries are pondering the idea of immunity certificates, almost like a passport that would allow those who have tested positive for antibodies to COVID-19 to return to work or to board an airplane, while those without immunity would need to follow restrictions until vaccines become available. Should Canada, in your opinion, do something similar to this?
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. The fact that you would be able to test for antibodies and then give people a certificate that would allow them to go back to work. Some people have proposed that having this certificate would almost be like kryptonite. You're able to go back into those sectors such as healthcare and frontline work, and do so with great confidence, knowing that you're not going to get COVID-19, nor are you going to transmit it to someone else. I think it's a really unique idea. I think it's one that should absolutely be considered. And again, this is one of the reasons why we should be having conversations. And for the Prime Minister to shut down that possibility is wrong.
And then, of course, while the world grapples with the coronavirus pandemic, China has been arresting pro-democracy leaders all across Hong Kong. How should Canada be responding to this?
Yeah, I find it interesting that the Prime Minister he refuses to condemn anything that China does. We're looking at a country with grave human rights records. We're looking at a country that functions as a dictatorship for all intents and purposes, and it's wrong. It's wrong. And so, what is happening within Hong Kong right now, and shutting down any demonstration of pro-democracy, or any demonstration that is pro-democracy, I just think that is absolutely wrong. And why wouldn't our Prime Minister stand up for democracy, stand up for human rights, stand up for freedom?
Absolutely. And then finally, Rachel, Canada has experienced its worst ever mass shooting that took place in Nova Scotia this past week. Any thoughts on this tragedy?
Yeah, Jenna, it's just so sad. It is so sad. A very senseless tragedy. Many lives lost, and I think sometimes we get lost in the number. And I think what's really important right now is actually for the Canadian public to understand that these are individuals with stories. These are individuals who touched the lives of many others, whether it was because they were a teacher or a nurse or a community volunteer. And so these are women and men who made incredible contributions, and they had families and loved ones, and those individuals got left behind and are now in this place of tremendous grief and turmoil. And as Canadians, I believe it's our responsibility to stand in solidarity with them. And certainly, as a member of Parliament, my heart is joined with them, and they're definitely in my prayers going forward.
Such a sad tragedy. Thank you for your thoughts on that, Rachel. And thank you for joining us too today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's very nice to be here with you.
That was Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachael Harder.